Diamond level analysis of Walpurga versus DralaFi. Silver versus gold. TvZ on Dusk Towers. So, first thing we want to look at is how is your opening? Are you missing SCVs? Well, you're missing it a bit, but that's probably because your build order is not very optimized. Later on I will give you a build order that is basically optimized to get the maximum SCVs out and get all the maximum production out as the best way possible. Just open. But for now, we just want to see. Try not to miss SCVs, like right here. We don't want to be missing SCVs. But if your build order was optimized, you wouldn't have missed that. And that's mostly just that reason. Generally, early on, it's more important to be producing the SCV first. So, aside from that, it's pretty good so far. You're producing the SCV, you're making the barracks, getting the gas, making the marines, getting the factory. This is looking really good right now. But let's see how this goes on. So, at this point, you generally want to get the orbital because meals are really good, and you generally want to get the orbital as fast as possible. Like, generally it's the first thing you do. So as soon as your barracks finishes, you just get the orbital. That's generally the way to go. Because mules really adds up over time. I mean, yeah, you want to be making SCVs, but at the same time, mules are good. So it's acceptable to stop making SCVs to get the orbital to make mules, but otherwise you do want to make SCVs. This is good. Even taking the expansion. Even producing it from the factory and the barracks. This is how we're doing very good so far. You're getting the starport. And the orbital is finished, but you're missing some SCVs now. You could drop the mule, but no more SCVs coming out. You stop producing from the factory. This is done. Could be getting an orbital or making SCVs from there too. You should get the orbital, by the way. Here you're falling off a bit. Like, you could be making from this barrack, you could be making SCVs, you could be making from the factory, the starport. And we see some circling harass coming, which doesn't really do much. Fend them off pretty easily. Okay, now your production is back on. So, let's go ahead. You didn't get the orbital here. You should get it at some point. Because you can never have too many mules. Mules are really good. Alright, so 530. This is our first benchmark, where we look at the number of SCVs you produce. So if you were macroing perfectly, like not missing a single SCV and using an optimized build order, you should have 48 SCVs. That's the maximum you can have. If you are doing an optimized build order, that's a Reaper expand, like not a CC first. If you have CC first, it could be more. But assuming like a safe build order, like Reaper expand, the maximum you can have is 48. And you have 33, so there is room for improvement here. But you don't have to be worried about getting 48, because even I don't get 48. I get about 42 at 530. Only like pros get 48. But that's something you should aim for. Also, around this time, your third base could be coming up. Generally, you don't want to take your third any later than 6 minutes, so now would be a good time to start your third. Let's look at your in-base production. Right now you're on 2 base, but you only have 2 barracks, 1 factory, and 1 starport. Now, remember, the maximum number of production you can support of 1 base is 1 barracks, 1 starport, 1 factory. But on 2 base, you can go up to 5 barracks, 1 starport, 1 factory. Now, that's the maximum. So once you have 5 and you are macroing out of all of them, you won't be able to afford a third base. But since we want a third base, if you're going to if you're not trying to all in, which you aren't, then you can actually go up to 8 barracks, 2 factory, and 1 starport, or 2 starport and 1 factory. So right now, you should be adding more barracks and the third base. So let's go ahead. The engineering bay is a good addition. But you notice you're banking out a lot of minerals, and that's because, yeah, you miss some production cycles, but you also have too few production structure. You could be adding a lot more barracks right now, and you could also be having a third coming up right now. Remember, when you see you have too much minerals, if you can't spend it, just add production. Just spend it somehow. At this point, it will never be a bad thing. This drop is a bit fancy, like, it's okay. Doesn't really do much, doesn't really affect the outcome of the game. Okay, actually I missed it. So, 730, 35. Right now, if you were macroing perfectly, you will have exactly 66 SCVs. Well, not exactly. You'll have at most 66 SCVs because that's the maximum you want. You don't want more than 66 SCVs. And you should also have your third base finished. So right now you're at 43, which like I said, only if you were playing macroing perfectly, like at a pro level, you would have 66. But like this is something you could work on. Like, you won't get 66, but it's a goal you should aim for. 66 SCVs at 730. And like I said, your third base should be up, which means you should have, remember, 8 barracks, 2 factory, 1 starport, or 1 factory, 2 starport. Or if you can actually still do 1 factory, 1 starport, but just add like 9 barracks instead. But just remember these numbers. You want to add production. So let's go ahead to the final benchmark, which is at 9 minutes. Alright. At 9 minutes is the final benchmark, and that's where you should be maxed out. 200, 200. And you're at 93, 94, which means you're halfway there, which is okay. But it could be a lot better. So look at him. He is at 122, 122. So he's doing a bit better than you. But if you were macroing perfectly up till this point, your 200, 200 can just A move into his base and win. Like to his like 120, 112 to 112. Like there's nothing he can do if you have 200, 200 and just A move into his base and you don't even pay attention. Simply because he won't have enough units. Now, I'm not saying that micro is useless. It's useful, but it's useful to a certain extent. There is a trade-off between microing and macroing, and right now, it's more important that you macro because your macro isn't at the point where the micro trade-off is worth it yet. Because even if you were microing perfectly, and he had 200, 200, and A moved into you, there's nothing you can do with your army, because you just don't have enough units, even if you are microing perfectly. So, now I'm not saying don't micro, but I'm saying that focus on macro first, and once your macro is at a point where you can be like close to 200, 200 at 9 minutes, like maybe even 150, you can just A move into his base and win. And then at that point, you could focus a bit more on micro, because then it will actually pay off. So it's like cost benefit analysis, something like that. You have to consider what is more efficient at the moment. And right now, it's more efficient for you to make sure your macro is on point. And once it is, then your micro will pay off more. But right now, if your macro is not on point, your micro won't pay off. Because someone who is macroing perfectly will just A move into you and win, even if you were microing perfectly. So this 2-factor is okay. But at this point, you should be considering a Forsu, because your main's almost mined out, and there it goes. So let's just go ahead. And so you see he's already maxed out, so he maxed out a bit earlier than you, which is acceptable for a Zerg, really, because the Zerg can max out faster than a Terran. But in this game, in particular, if you could have maxed out way earlier than him, because at the 9-minute mark, you could be maxed out when he was only at 120, 112, 112. So if you were both playing perfectly, yeah, he will max out faster than you. But since right now, neither of you are playing perfectly, so if you just focused on maxing out before him, you could actually just straight up A move and win. So we see a bit of an engagement here. He actually does like a flank thing. Now, this engagement is kind of bad because your tanks weren't sieged up. If they were sieged up, they would have made a huge difference in this situation. But overall, it doesn't cost you the game. Like, yeah, I mean, that's definitely not optimal. You took a horrible loss. He only lost 50 supply, you lost like 100. But it doesn't cost you the game. So, like, that's what I'm saying. Like, yeah, you could work on micro. I'm not saying micro isn't important. Like, if you did do a bit of better micro, like sieged up the tanks, or like split your marines against the banelings, then yeah, you could have taken that fight out, and you could have kept pushing. But if you were, if your macro was on point, it wouldn't have even gotten to that point. At 9 minutes, you would have just A moved into his base and won. So that's what I'm saying, is that micro is important, but there's a trade-off, and it's only important to a certain extent. If your macro is not on point, then microing too much will actually not be efficient, because he will be able to just have more units than you, to the point where micro makes no difference and he can just A move and win. And we see here that does not cost you the game. You eventually push it back. So it's all good. Now, you should really be considering maybe even a 4th base. I mean, a 5th base, a 6th base, maybe even a 7th base at this point. Maybe not the 7th, maybe 5th and 6th base. Especially considering you have so much minerals banked up. Because might as well spend it. And I don't think you actually added any structure since when I last looked. You added 1 barracks and 3 barracks, 2 factory, and 1 starport. Which, I stress again, that adding this production structure is important. Especially for a Terran, because Terran's production is very punishing. If you're not producing now, you're not getting it back later. Whereas for Zerg, they can actually bank up. So it's very important for Terran to actually be adding the production necessary so that they're always producing at all points in time. Terran is a pretty hard race to play. So at this point, it's going to be a contest of who can trade and remax. So what I mean by that is, you have this army, and you're going to attack into his army. And you're going to lose, both of you will lose units, and that's a trade. So microing means that you will try and take the better trade, so you will try to lose less units than him. But at this point, if your macro is not on point, like I said, it's not going to be as important as simply having more units to trade against him. So let's look. He has 14k minerals and 1k gas, and you have 1.5k minerals and 255 gas, but yet you two are at the same supply. So that actually means his economy is better than yours, because if he was banking up this much minerals, then he should have less supply than you if he has a worse economy. So right now your economy is severely lacking, which means you can't trade as much as he can. Yet once you lose these units, they're gone, and you can't replace them. Whereas he can use his huge bank to just continuously replace units and eventually overwhelm you. So this is what we'll see as the game goes on. Both of you are losing units, but he can replace them, and you're running out of money. And he just spent a bunch of his money making this huge Mutalisk ball, which is actually kind of funny. Because this many Mutalisk is actually not that good versus anything. I mean, the turrets, yeah, you can kill all the turrets. Now you come out and take out his base, which is really good. And this is actually hilarious here, because Thors are actually really good versus Mutalisks when they bunch up like this. Another unit that's good versus Mutalisks when they bunch up like this is Liberators. So yeah, you take out his base, which means if you two were playing perfectly, this would be a huge advantage to you, because he would lose the mineral income from this base. But the thing is, he already banked up so much because he wasn't playing perfectly, which means taking out that one base makes a lot less difference than what it would be if you were, say, attacking at the 9-minute mark with 200 army and moving to his base. If at 9 minutes you took out this base, it would make a lot more difference than taking out this base at 20 minutes. And that's because at 9 minutes, resources are a lot more scarce. He wouldn't have this huge bank up that he could just rely on even if he loses the base. And this is generally more of a thing in lower level when the macro isn't perfect. And you'll see that if you were pushing at 9 minutes, remember at 9 minutes you have 112 and 112. If you had 200 and just pushed into his base, this, no matter how much he banked up, it would be useless. You would just straight up win. And the only reason that he has so much banked up right now is because you weren't able to do the push at 9 minutes with all your maxed army. So eventually the game drags on longer, and his bank actually comes in hand now at this point. So if this was at 9 minutes, this would be game-ending damage. But this is at 21 minutes, and he has a huge bank. So this is what I mean when I say the power of Remax. Because look, your money is running really low. This base almost mined out. This base only base mining. Nothing here. Nothing here. At 22 minutes, you should have this base for sure. You should have this base, I would say for sure. Maybe you should have this base even. And maybe even this base. But you don't. Which means you're running really low on money. So you can't afford to be losing these units because you won't have the money to replace them. Let's look at your production. 1 Thor, 1 Marauder, 4 Marines only. And you're losing way more than that. So once these units are gone, you're going to have nothing at home. But look at his huge bank. He can keep making stuff, and you can't afford to. So that means he can remax, and you cannot. And eventually, in this state, he will just win. But you should be winning. Because look at it. You're killing his entire base. You should be winning. But you're not. You're not going to, because your economy is dead now. You're not getting a better economy anymore. So you're going to slowly run out of money, and you're not going to be able to support losing all these units very soon. See, he has Broodlords now. Whereas normally, there's no way he can afford that. But that's the power of Remax. Actually, he's not maxed yet, but he will be soon. Now, Broodlords are a bit tricky, because if you A-move your units, you see the Marines will actually like to attack the Broodlings, rather than the Broodlords themselves. So, I think the best way to like counter Broodlords is actually make Vikings. Or Battlecruisers work too, especially the Yamato cannon. But, like, Marines is a bit tricky because you actually have to focus fire the Broodlords themselves. Thors do kind of okay, but the damage is pretty weak. So I would say Vikings is a better choice versus Broodlords, because they require the least amount of micro control. Because with Marines, actually, you do have to like run forward and then focus fire. Finally, you're taking another base here. But look, your money is going lower. It's still going lower, and you're only at 127. Whereas look at his income. I mean, look at how much money he still has banked up. And we watch the supply count. Just watch as his will slowly just overtake yours by a massive amount. I mean, yeah, once again, that engagement could have gone better. But it doesn't matter because you can't remax anymore. So once you lose that army, you have nothing more to replace it with. Whereas if he lost that army, he still has lots of money to keep replacing it. So we just watch his supply grow. And now you're finally trying to take your expansion. But he actually does this tricky thing where he borrows a Zergling right underneath here. So your expansion can't land. But you actually can see it. Like, you can't see it borrowed. But it just won't land. So you kind of just have to realize that, oh, maybe there's something borrowed here, and then you have to scan it and kill it. It's kind of like it's kind of troll. Like, yeah, you won't see it, but it just won't land. So yeah, from here we just see he's going up to 176, eventually 200, and you're stuck at 109 because you're broke. You don't have the money. You can't make more units anymore, and he could keep making them. Because look at it. What did he do since that attack? He took this base. He took this base. He took this base. Whereas only now you're just trying to take this one base. You haven't took this base yet. I don't even know what happened to this base. I think you flew it here. No? Yeah, I think you flew it there. So that's what I mean. You need to be able to remax first of all, you need the economy to remax, which you don't have, so you can't afford to build any more units. But when you had the economy, you could have had more production structure, so you can remax faster. And at this point, he's just going to overwhelm you with his 200 army. Even if you were microing perfectly, there's nothing you can do because he just has too much stuff. And because he has so much money banked up, even if you killed it, he can just remake the whole thing. Whereas if he kills your army, you can't remake the whole thing because you don't have the money to. So yeah, so I think in summary here, first of all is you could have a better build order, which I will show you in a different video probably. But even despite that, secondly, you want to be making sure you're taking your expansion early and building your production. So once again, remember, you want 8 barracks, 2 factory, 1 starport, or 2 starport, 1 factory, off 3 bases. And you want to be making sure you're taking your 4th, your 5th, your 6th base as your main, your natural, your 3rd mines out. So that way, you have the money to remax. And by remax, you will be able to simply overwhelm him as the game progresses, because he won't have the money to make the army, as you just experienced. And you will have the money. So, is to, number 1, make sure your economy is in session, and number 2, add production structure as your economy goes up. And then just keep making units and remaxing, and you should just beat him. So, now once again, remember, I'm not saying micro is not important, but remember, it's a trade-off. At some point, you have to make sure your macro is on point before you can focus on the micro. Otherwise, as we see here, his 200 army is just too much. There's nothing you could have done, even if you were microing perfectly. He just aimed into you with his 200 army, and he just won. So, good luck and have fun.